I now wish to call upon His Worship John Tory, Mayor of Toronto.
Color guard. Order. Color.
Good morning, and I want to say thank you at the outset for so many people having come out today on this very special Remembrance Day. They're all special, but this one I think is particularly special. And that's because, as you know, this year's Remembrance Day marks the 100th anniversary of the end of what was known as the Great War, a war that helped to forge the character of this great country, and it was a then very young nation, and a war that was one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. 100 years ago, the guns fell silent in Europe. Here in Toronto, a city that had been so focused on supporting the war effort, the streets were filled with celebration. And today, on some of those same streets, members of the Canadian Armed Forces helped us to remember. And I want to acknowledge, as we've done earlier on, the approximately 250 members of the 32 Canadian Brigade Group, part of the 4th Canadian Division of the Canadian Armed Forces, who marched from Union Station to Old City Hall today to replicate the march home of our troops from the Great War 100 years ago today. And on behalf of all of us, I want to thank each and every one of them and all who serve with them for their ongoing service to our wonderful country. This day, 100 years ago, would have been a great day for so many, though accompanied by a deep sense of sadness and grieving for so many. By war's end, more than 3/4 of all eligible young men in Toronto had volunteered to serve. More than 45,000 Torontonians served in the Canadian Expeditionary Force or with the British Army. Relative to today's population, I think it's important to put these things into context. Relative to today's population, that would have meant some 311,000 young people being called upon to serve. That's hard to imagine, but it's crucial to having a real understanding of the human impact of that war right here in this city. For so many here in Toronto, November 11th, 1918 would have been a day where, after years of bad, awful, continuous, heart-wrenching news, there was finally some good news. There was peace. But while many celebrated and many returned home to our Toronto, we know that thousands did not. Others came home broken, whether it was their bodies or their minds or both. We know the toll the war took on so many and the impact that had on those who cared for them. And it is important to acknowledge that toll is still taken today. Service to our country in areas of conflict can still cause that physical and mental hurt, both for those who serve and for their families, a fact which we today must collectively acknowledge and act upon. Sadly, we all know that not long after 1918, the clouds of war gathered again. Just 2 decades later, the guns were silent no more, and the world was once again plunged into war, a horrendous war that would take the lives of millions more soldiers and civilians around the globe. As the years wear on and the distance grows between the present day and both the First and Second World Wars and other conflicts to follow, it is so important that our determination to remember the sacrifices of our veterans, of all the men and women of those great generations, remains absolutely steadfast. We gather here today in front of this cenotaph as a city dedicated to honoring all of those who've answered the call of service. Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour rendre hommage à ceux qui nous ont servi et pour nous en souvenir comme nous le devons. Ce sont eux qui, on Remembrance Day, should be seen as an opportunity to honor Canada's veterans and to renew our commitment to striving for peace, seeking a world without war, standing up for a way of life that so many gave their lives to preserve and to protect. And now, more than ever, that way of life must continue to include respect for each other, acceptance of each other, the freedom to be who you are. That was a big part of what that sacrifice was all about. The greatest act of respect and remembrance we could perform in honor of those we lost in all of the wars would be to stand up against a seemingly growing tide of polarization and, far too often, outright hatred. We have seen the lessons to be learned from that. This, too, was what those young people were fighting against, and it must never again take a war to remind us that a part of our hard-earned liberty is not just to be able to say what we want and to be who we are, but also to live in a city and in a world where we respect each other and pledge to live free of discrimination and hatred. Looking around here today, it's clear to me that the future of Remembrance Day is in good hands. We see young people here today who will not forget what has been sacrificed so that they can live in freedom. And I think we must all pray that our future generations will not repeat the mistakes of the past that led to the outbreak of these wars. I hope that 100 years from today, on November the 11th, 2118, the Mayor of Toronto can stand here and look back on a century that has been more peaceful than the century we are looking back upon from this moment in time, and that the Mayor on that day will be able to thank all the generations who have helped to protect and defend our ongoing freedom, secured so many years ago by our brave veterans, to whom we say a small but very important, seems somewhat inadequate word of thanks today, lest we forget. Thank you.
Government and Parliament of Canada, Mr. Adam Vaughan, MP. Province of Ontario, Ms. Suze Morrison, MPP. Veterans Affairs Canada, Tabitha Stubbs, Area Director. Canadian Brigade Group,